Welcome to Zennurgy, the interactive podcast providing resources for building a better life. I am Zennurgy, your catalyst, coach, and conduit to that better life. A coach draws out hidden potential in a subject. A catalyst sparks change, and a conduit provides a connection. So I was talking about self-care. Our energy is so precious to us. Our mindset is so precious, and when you have boundaries in your life, you basically put limits on how people are going to treat you and what you're going to put up with. You might have to look at your surroundings. I kind of came up with this acronym as I was thinking about boundaries, and it's E.D.A.N, but it's not E.D.A.N spelled E-D-E-N. It's E.D.A.N spelled E-D-A.N. And so the first part is examine, like examine your needs and the situations that you find yourself in, because our needs can change. As I've become 50, I might need a little more, I might need a nap, in the middle of the day. So my boundary might be, okay, I need an hour to myself to take a nap. And that might not have been a boundary that I had before, or starting a new business. Maybe you have to cut out certain things, and maybe you have to tell some people no when they always expected you to show up and come to everything they're doing. You're like, I got a business now, I can only do certain things at certain times. So I think sometimes you have to examine your needs and have your needs change. And then you have to look at the situations that you're finding yourself in. You have to look and see, okay, how is this person, as you said, feeding my energy? How is this situation feeding my energy? And do I need to change what I'm doing? Do I need to set up some different limits on it? What have you found yourself having to examine anything differently, look at your relationships differently, or situations when it comes to boundary setting?
I think I come off. Actually, no, I'm not, I don't even just come off. I am kind of very hard headed. So a lot of times when things come up, I like whatever I feel in that moment. I feel like that is just the truth, and I hold on to it. And I mean, it has taken a lot of like hard lessons for me to like really self reflect. So I'm still learning how to like just examine, because in my mind I don't think I can examine in the moment. I always have to do like an afterthought type of thing. So I'm still learning like any types of tools and tricks like that would make me just be present in that moment and like understand what it is that I need to make the situation better.
That's good. And I think that's true. I think that sometimes in the moment, we get caught up in emotion and we get caught up in appearances, how things
Yeah.
look. But sometimes things are not the way they look. Sometimes when we reflect, as you said, when we take a little bit of time and we step out of our stubbornness, as you said, we see that there's a different way of looking at things, and we can examine things a little differently. So I think that self-reflection is really important, especially when setting boundaries, because sometimes your boundaries change and they move, and the people around you may not always understand that
Yeah.
because they're used to you being a certain way. But the thing about being an adult is we have to take responsibility for ourselves, and sometimes we don't have to do a whole lot of explaining. Look, my life is different,
That's true.
and I have to change certain things for it to work for me, and we have to have that assertiveness to speak up for ourselves, and that's another part of boundary setting. Have you found yourself, do you think that you've become more assertive or less assertive, or have you struggled with being assertive, standing up for yourself at all?
I think I've always been like really assertive when it came to my boundaries, and I think that has made me like get this like description of like being mean, because I've done it from like a very young age. But as I get older, I notice that like, my friends are starting to do the same thing as well. And I'm like, see, you thought I was being mean, but like right now you're learning that you have to set those type of boundaries for yourself in order to really like achieve some of the goals that you want to, because you can't get caught up with like what everybody else is doing around you and how you're going to please like other people. So
I agree with you on that. Yeah. So with this E.D.A.N acronym, we were talking about examining your life. We're talking about that self-reflection. We're talking about being honest with yourself, stepping out of the moment and thinking about what you're doing and where you are and who you're with. And then as you were talking about deciding certain things, deciding, you know, the boundaries that you're going to set, deciding those boundaries that are needed. And then as you were talking about staying firm, because even when people were calling you mean, you didn't just say, I'm going to give up all my boundaries so they don't call me
No.
mean.
Nope, 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 nope.
So, okay, let's say that there's a person out there and they're nervous about being called mean or selfish, or somebody saying, well, you're not really a good woman if you don't do X that's outside of their boundaries. What advice would you have for that person, since you feel like you've been assertive? Because a lot of us have not been, I have not been assertive my whole life. I had to learn to be assertive. So I'm kind of in admiration of people who kind of seem to have been born with that assertive bone in their body. So what advice would you give a person like that who has struggled with maybe finding their voice or feeling comfortable being assertive? What advice would you have for them?
Honestly, like I feel like it only really came for me because both my parents are immigrants. So for them being in America, like they had a lot to prove. So it's always like, oh, you don't want to embarrass me. You don't want to do this. Look at how you're making me look. And I would just always be like, who cares? Like that's just me because I was, I guess, a rebel child or whatever. So I would just be like, who cares? And so I kind of took that mantra with me throughout school, throughout life. And honestly, like I feel like more people just need to adopt a who cares attitude pretty much. I mean, I look at other people and I'm like, okay, well I want to be more grounded. So obviously it's not like my like way is the like the only way. It's we all have something to learn from each other. So for me, like I surround myself around a lot of grounded people so that way I can pick up some of their you know like personality traits. I feel like if you want to be a more assertive person, you need to surround yourself with someone who is assertive, but you have to surround yourself with someone who's assertive and someone who you like. Because if you just find any old person who is assertive, you may find yourself in a toxic situation because there may be boundaries, of course, like that they cross because they are that assertive, or so they think you know
That's some good advice. You know, I was told when I was a kid, if you want to be an eagle, don't hang out with the turkeys, you know? So we become, what was it my grandmother used to say? Like birds of a feather flock together.
Yeah.
And somebody else said, if I want to know who you are, let me see your 5 closest friends, because I will see things about you through them, because we generally tend to associate with people that are like us. But making that effort to say, you know what, I'm going to seek out someone who has some skills that I don't have. That assertiveness is a good thing, or that groundedness, as you were saying. So I think that's a really good advice to try to emulate and model, other people that you see that are being successful
Mm-hmm.
with the things that you don't have. And I think also going back to the E.D.A.N acronym, so first you're examining your life to see what boundaries you need. Then you're deciding on those boundaries and making some firm decisions, and maybe even deciding on the people that you're going to look towards, maybe
Yeah.
to mentor you or to influence you. And then I think you have to begin to articulate, for me, I had to begin to write affirmations
Mm-hmm.
about some of my boundaries. I had to say it to myself over and over again, because what happens to me, or what I think happens to a lot of us, is we have a certain mindset. And the only way to change that mindset is to revisit our decisions, write them down, revisit them, and then to speak about them to ourselves. We don't necessarily have to speak about them to other people at first. You're eventually going to have to tell people your
Yeah.
boundaries, but I think you have to become kind of comfortable a little bit first, and a little confident first with those new decisions that you've made, and begin to kind of say it to yourself like, okay, let me rehearse this conversation that I'm getting ready to have with my mama. Let me say it. Maybe I want to say it that way. Maybe I want to say it this way. And maybe you have these conversations where you practice um, that new boundary setting and you think about how you want to explore that with somebody. What do you think about that idea?
I would think that's like, the best way to do things for sure. Um, Deciding on my boundaries. I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question so I can answer it? Like, I don't
Like,
know.
do you think it's good to kind of affirm to yourself, to say to yourself, maybe writing affirmations or kind of talking yourself through those conversations that you might need to have before you actually spit out your new boundaries to
Okay,
somebody?
so yeah, now I remember what I was gonna say. Okay, so yeah, most definitely that is definitely like the way you would want to do things. Especially for me because like I said, I was like the rebel child. I've never really grown out of that, even though yes, now I'm like, okay, my parents are getting older, so there is like, respect that I owe them that I might have not given them when I was younger. But then like, old ways still come about. Like I still just, blurt things out. And I've always been like a writer. I've always done like poetry, and I've always written stories and scripts of all types. And I feel like that is the affirmations is like a good way to lead myself into better decisions. But I never feel like I have the time to do it. And I feel like that in itself is just an excuse because I definitely could make the time to do it. But it takes a lot, within you to like really have to sit down with yourself and like, be honest about what you need to do and how you need to start saying things, because I've always despised like when people said like it's not how you say it, oh, it's not what you said, it's how you say it. Because for me, I'm like a person, I'm gonna take whatever you said however you intended it for it to be, whether you sugarcoated it or you just said it straight out. But learning like, that's not how a lot of people are. Like a lot of people really would prefer a more mild way of saying things. So I mean, that type of thing, I feel like I need to write more about how other people are, because I already understand myself and I know myself. So that's why a lot of things don't bother me. But if I want to have lasting relationships, I think the writing the affirmations thing and like deciding how I'm going to speak to people is the way to go.
That sounds good. Yeah, I think boundaries are important in lasting relationships because I think we have to learn how to coexist peacefully, and we have to learn our boundaries, but also what are other people's boundaries?
Yeah.
What makes them feel uncomfortable? What makes them feel like, oh, you went too far?
Yeah.
It could
Yeah.
be somebody saying, ah, man, that was harsh what you just said. And maybe you're like, okay, maybe I could have said that softer and nicer. So we all have those. We have the continuum, of people who don't speak up enough, and then people who are very assertive and maybe they're a little too blunt. I have been on the too blunt side, even though I wasn't always assertive because I had a lot of opinions,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I've had to learn how to become more tactful as I've gotten older. The last letter in that E.D.A.N acronym is to kind of normalize the use of your boundaries, to get used to living in this new normal, and also to be prepared for some kickback or pushback,
Yeah.
because if somebody's used to you doing a certain thing and then you switch up, they why are you switching up on,
Yeah.
and you have to be prepared for that. And also you have to also think about what are you going to do if they don't respect your boundaries?
Right.
Are you going to distance yourself from that person? Are you going to, what kind of um, consequences or reactions are you going to have? So that's something to think about. So I know that you talk with a lot of people in Dallas,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a podcast served on Sundays. Can you kind of tell us about what you do there?
So, Served on Sundays, I created it to be kind of like a networking type of podcast where different Dallas creatives, professionals, entrepreneurs come on and we talk about like trending topics or, just real life stuff in general.
Okay, that sounds really good. I mean, I do something similar with laughs and lyrics. I invite a lot of creatives onto a live show, and we do live comedy, music, and poetry. So that's probably why we connected. That's probably why we were
Yes.
Instagram friends, because we had some of the same little vibration going on, the same circle going on. Um, so with COVID, has that impacted you at all, or how has it impacted you? How have you found yourself maybe having to change things? Anything?
I wouldn't say like we were really affected that much. I do my podcast out of my house. So for me, it was like I was still okay with people coming over. So as long as people like, wanted to come over, they wanted to like, Lysol down stuff. Like, I mean, whatever they needed to do to make them comfortable, like I was down for it. And I don't think I was really affected that much. If anything, I think I had more guests. Like a lot of people really wanted to come on because they didn't have like their usual thing to do on Sundays. So
Okay. Okay. So it seems like, they might have had some boundaries when they came over because they to feel comfortable. All
yeah.
right. So when it comes to relationships, how do you think that boundaries can hurt or hinder relationships? What do you think about that?
Um, I feel like with boundaries in relationships, like you have to be on the same page because a lot of times you may feel a way about things, but you don't voice that, and people aren't mind readers, so they keep doing it. And you may take it as like, okay, but you're my friend, so why are you doing that? That means you're not my friend. And really, in their mind, it's like, okay, but this is what I do with my friends, so why are you upset? Like I thought we were, cool like this. And so you really have to be on the same page. And the only way to do that is by like, having a conversation. And that is when you start to get pushback, because feelings get hurt because nobody wants to be told that they're mean. Nobody wants to be told that they did something to hurt somebody. So um that is like a hard conversation to get through, but that's where you know who, like, the true people that need to be around you are, because if they have that much pushback that they're going to be like, weird to you, then they probably didn't really need to be around you, you know what I'm saying? So
That's true. That's true. And what you're bringing up is expectations.
yeah.
Like a lot of times people have unvoiced expectations. They think that you know me, we've been hanging out forever. You
Right.
know what I expect, but you may not know what they expect. And I found myself, I think women do it. We get accused of doing it a lot. Men accuse us of, she always expects me to read her mind.
Yeah.
We get accused of that a lot. And a lot of times women will say, well, I shouldn't have to tell you how to be a man, you
Right.
know. And I think it's just those expectations, and it's good to voice your expectations. I remember before I got married the second time, when I had just met, I was friends with my now deceased husband. I was friends with him for a while. We were just friends, and then we had this conversation one night. We talked for like 3 hours, and we talked about everything. Like, we're going to get into this relationship. So, what happens if one of us cheats? What happens if one of us loses our job? What happens if this happens? How are we going to deal with this? How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to discipline the kids? How are we going to deal with the in-laws? How are we going to We literally went through every single topic that we could think of, and we actually set up, in a sense, our boundaries.
Hmm.
Like, what were his expectations of me? What were my expectations of him? And if those expectations weren't met, now while we're calm and we're feeling all lovey-dovey and we're wanting to commit to each other and all this kind of stuff, we actually sat down and talked about how we might react. So we actually brainstormed, like, how would I feel? How would I think? How would I react? And we just had this really long, like I said, it was like a 3 hour conversation. And we just set up just basically all night and just talked all these things out. And I had never done anything like that before. It had never even
come up in any of my relationships for us to do something like that before. But we were married almost 11 years. And in that time, we had like 2 fights
Wow.
because we had already talked out everything ahead
Mm.
of time. And I already knew how he was going to react to some things. It wasn't a surprise. And he already knew how I was going to react to some things. So we went into the relationship having this very clear picture of how the other person thought and how they felt about certain things and how they would react to certain things. And I, of all the things we did wrong, which we did a lot wrong, that was the one thing we did right. And it made our relationship so peaceful
Mm.
because we knew where each other stood. And it would be good if you have that kind of consistency, because we didn't in a sense change about those things. It would be one thing if you have that conversation with somebody and they change up every 5 minutes.
Right.
They feel this way one day and this way the next day. It wouldn't work then, but for us that really worked. I think that having those kind of conversations where you really talk about expectations and boundaries, it also gives you a sense of security because you kind of know what to expect from that person. And
Right.
it kind of makes you feel powerful because you also know what you can do, your limits, and what you can't do or what you shouldn't do. Which we already know some things we shouldn't do, but kind of gives us some insight. So let's talk a minute about empowerment. How do you think that having boundaries can kind of empower somebody? What do you think about that topic?
Um, I guess it would empower people because they would know like how much their decisions like can hold weight in their like own lives, because sometimes people make like really snap decisions and they don't even realize they're making those decisions, whether it's just hanging out with a friend or spending an extra night at your man's house or whatever. Like those like little decisions, they can mean a lot in the grand scheme of things. So I feel like having those boundaries is going to lead people toward a certain path to where they can be like right on the goal that they want to be at.
I can agree with that. I can agree with that. You know, um, I was thinking about different type of boundaries, like emotional boundaries. I remember when I was a kid, I was a teenager, and my uncle was alcoholic. And we went to Al-Anon. The whole family was going through counseling with him, and they started talking about codependency.
Uh-huh.
And they started talking about how you're not responsible for other people's feelings. You shouldn't say things like, "Oh, you make me so mad." Because actually, you can choose to have something happen to you and not react as mad. And so they were saying you got to learn to separate your emotions from other people, and take responsibility for your reactions, and you know think about how you could do things differently. And I know with women, a lot of times I heard Will Smith say, "I decided that it wasn't my job to make my wife happy." And people were like, "Oh, that sounds like a horrible thing." And he was like, it's I want to do the things that make her happy. Don't get me wrong. I want to do all the things that make her happy, but it's not my job to make her happy. It's my job to add to her happiness that she already has, but her feelings are not my responsibility. And going back to, like I said, Al-Anon, and hearing people talk about that now, sometimes I think you have to have emotional boundaries, that I am responsible for my feelings. You are responsible for your feelings, and you tell me the things that bother you, that hurt you, and I'm going to not do those things. But I can't walk on eggshells, being worried about every little thing I do, how this person's going to feel, how this person's going to react. I have to actually live my life the best that I can, and be accepting of your feelings, listen to your feelings, supportive of your feelings, respect your feelings, but not take total responsibility for your feelings. So I think that there's a boundary, as we were saying, where you have to kind of think about those things differently. What do you think about that? Like, have you ever felt that somebody was trying to make you responsible for their feelings?
I would say that I'm probably the one in a relationship that's like very codependent because I do feel like sometimes, we were put on this world to like really connect with each other. And when you were describing like the whole walking on eggshells thing, to me, yeah, that's like veering towards the toxic end of the spectrum. But as far as like feeling like you should be there for me to be able to call on, like those type of things, those type of expectations, I feel like those are things that make me happy. I feel like those are things that would make anyone happy. Because there's different levels to happiness for me, because I have this happiness with myself just solo, like I'm happy. But then like I think about, okay, well, I want to be around people right now. And then I'm like, okay, well, now I'm unhappy. So now I'm not happy in this state. And it's not that, I'm not happy in general or with myself. Like, no, I love myself. I'm, feeling good, whatever. But, in that whole area of my life, I'm like, okay, well, I'm unhappy because I need, to feel this from a friend to really feel like they're being a real friend. So, I mean, I would say I'm like the more codependent person out of a group. So, yeah.
Well, we do have needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have your food, your clothing, your shelter, and you have more emotional needs, but they're just as vital. So we do have a need to belong. We do have a need to be supported. We do have a need to feel like our lives mean something, like we're actually self-actualizing is the word he uses. So there's nothing wrong with wanting support. There's nothing wrong with even feeling like you need support. We all need support at different times, you know. Um, so it's just about realizing that there are certain things we have to take responsibility for, and there are other things that we can get help for, and our friends can be there for us. Um, but there's some people that they don't take responsibility for anything. They
Yeah.
want to blame everybody else for everything, and that becomes that kind of unhealthy enmeshment. So there's also, when you talk about boundaries, and you were kind of mentioning it, when you have those relationships and you feel like your needs aren't met, there can be wounds. There can be scars. And sometimes people, when that happens, they want to build this huge wall, and they want to push everybody on the other side of that wall, and they want to call that a boundary. And that's not actually what a boundary is supposed to be. A boundary is not supposed to be a wall that nobody can get through. A boundary is actually supposed to be flexible to a certain extent, where you can open it up, let people come in, teach them how you want to be treated. What I'm saying? You can have layers to this. What I'm saying? You have your inner circle, then you have your not as close circle, and then you got some people out here on the peripheries, then you might have the people that are on the other side of the wall
Yeah.
that you're not going to let in because they're not safe to let in. But to have a wall up for everybody, that's when we need to have like some healing. Um, and what would you say about people who you feel like need to have healing because they do have that wall up so high, so thick, they're not letting anybody close? What would you say to that person? Do you have any advice for that person?
I feel like I can be that person sometimes. So I don't know if I have like the best advice, because people are not as willing to like be open and talk about their feelings and expectations of what they want from one another. And even like, when you are in a fight with a friend or whoever, and they're like, oh, well, what do you want from me? Sometimes, like, in that moment, you don't feel like you even want to tell them, because it's like, okay, well, now if I tell you, are we even supposed to be friends? Because you should know stuff like this or whatever. So for me, I don't know, like, I feel like, okay, you should give everyone's worth a conversation. That's what I've always, said. Like, no matter what happens, like, everyone's worth a conversation, on whatever it is that they want to talk about, like on that specific topic only. And then you have to move on. And then you can make decisions from there. So I feel like you should give, people a chance to really speak their piece and really say where they're coming from, so you can understand things from a different perspective, because you may be unhealed yourself, or a certain part of you may be unhealed, so you may be looking through a lens that's not as clear, without hearing the other side. So definitely just always have a conversation.
I think that's really good advice to listen and be open. And I try sometimes to kind of step outside of myself, to say, let me try to be objective. Let me pretend I'm not me for a minute. And let me pretend that I'm just a stranger listening to this person talk about our situation that we just had. How would a stranger who wasn't in the middle of it, who wasn't emotional about it, how would they see this? And would they see their side of it? Would they say, okay, that has value? Because sometimes people can look at the same situation and see two different things, and they're both right,
Right.
and neither one is wrong, because they're looking at it from two different angles. And they're looking, especially with men and women, or older and younger, or a parent and a child. That's two different perspectives. And so I've learned that as I've gone through life, that some people I thought were so wrong, when I listened to them, I was like, I never thought about it that way. Oh, okay. Okay, my bad.
I was gonna say, like, I tend to play devil's advocate in like a lot of situations, just because a lot of people, when they're set on like one thing, or even like, a viral story, like people can be set on like one side. And I'm like, okay, but we also have to look at if this happened this way, because and I think that's why sometimes I have like a disconnect with people, and like my boundaries can't be like given in a clear message, because I understand things from like so many different angles, but I know sometimes people only see things from their own angle. And that's not to like, put myself higher, but I've just always been that person, like, and I guess that's like where really like the codependency thing comes from, because I'm like, okay, but what would they think if this happened like that, or like how did they respond to the situation? And so yeah, I've always like really been like, an advocate for saying to like see all sides of a situation.
Well, that's good advice, to try to see all sides of it, and even to play the devil's advocate. I'm a teacher, and there are times when we would be getting ready to do a debate, and I would tell people, okay, pick your sides, and then I would switch them. I would make them switch. So whoever was going to be for the topic goes, okay, now you guys are against it. Whoever was going to be against it, now you're for it. Now here, go sit down and brainstorm. Sit down and think about the other side. Because a lot of people never do think about the other side.
Right.
And there is many times, most times, another side. And so when we think about relationships or situations, you know, that's where that flexibility comes in, because sometimes when you have that conversation and you have this expectation, my expectations here, and you talk to that person and they're like, I can meet you here. Is this okay? And you talk things out, you can kind of say, okay, that might be okay. And then sometimes you have to say, no, that's not
Right.
all right. It depends on the situation. But sometimes boundaries need to be flexible. You have to compromise about some things, and other things you have to, that's where it comes in, examining and making decision. What's a need and what's a want? You know?
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about that concept of needs versus wants?
um I just think of like, with your boundaries, like there's always like a tier of like relationships kind of. And you're saying like having to say no to certain people. I feel like sometimes that can be a hard transition, because they may have been like someone who was like really really important in your life, and then you have to demote them to a lower level. But sometimes because of their how they move, that is like what you need to do, because you have to be on a certain path. And even though, I was saying earlier, like I seek out people who are different because I want a certain quality of theirs for myself. Um, I still seek out people that like I would actually like I would actually be like, inspired by, and like I could learn from, and that are genuine and authentic, and not going to be like, there's not going to be any type of hateful or jealous energy between us type of people. um, and I feel like sometimes people miss the mark on that, and they are just looking at, what they want, because they want like an instant gratification type of thing, and they're not realizing like, you gotta put people in certain categories, like, they can't come with you everywhere, they can't always, be around you, because they're going to distract you. You have to do what you need to do and put them wherever it is in your life that you see fit to get you back on the right path.
That's some good advice. I like that idea of tears. I like that idea. I like that. I went this way, you went this way. We still said the same thing. That was kind of
Right, yeah.
cool. Because I said circles and you said tears. But I like that word tears, because tears has to me that connotation of like, as you were saying, importance and value and worth and what has this person kind of like, what impact do they have on me? What do they sow into my life? So I like that word tears. I'm gonna be using that word now.
Hey.
Tears. I
Tears.
like that. So, I'm thinking about a commercial that I saw recently, and you probably have seen this commercial. And they have different versions of it. The one that I saw, I think last night, there was a little girl who had walked into a boxing club. She looked like she was maybe 10, maybe. And this woman drove up in a car, and she got into the car, and she said, "He told me I should take dance lessons." And the woman speeding around the corner, "Does it look like I want you to dance? Do you see how I'm taking these corners? We don't settle. We don't compromise. We go for what we want. We get what we want." And she drives the little girl around after she's gone to the corner, and the little girl's like, and she gets out, and you see her hitting the punching bag. So, and there was another version of it where a woman was asking for a raise, and she came out and got in the car, and she said something like, "He told me to try next year," or "He told me something." And the woman was like, same kind of pep talk. Go back in there, fight for what you want. Go back in there, don't take less. I like that commercial, because that commercial was about boundaries. It was also about standing up for yourself. It was about assertiveness. And it had the small girl, and then it had the woman, different situations completely, but that whole idea of don't let somebody, in this case a man, tell you what you can have and what you can't have. And I think of the feminist movement. A lot of people hate that word feminist. And I understand why they dislike the word feminist, because they say that feminism sometimes, or in their opinion, destroyed the family. And it wasn't for, in a sense, Black people, because Black women and Black men were working together pre-feminism. And then there was kind of a divide that some people say came when it wasn't about the whole community rising, it was just about women rising. So I understand those arguments, but I also understand the need for women to have a voice.
Right.
And to feel supported by other women in using that voice and saying, stop letting them push your boundaries back. Stop letting them use the B word against you and calling you a ball breaker, and you scared that they're going to think that you're this and that. Go in there and ask for what you want, demand what you want, you know. And we look at Kamala Harris.
Right.
They called her everything but a child of God when she got nominated, you know, and they went into her sex life. And just they didn't do that with other candidates. She slept her way to the top. And it's like, why is a powerful woman such a threat?
Right.
Why do you feel, why do some people in society feel like they have to knock powerful women down? You know, take them down a peg. And I think sometimes as women, as Black women, we are fighting to be recognized, respected, seen as equal. And we're constantly having to push our boundaries back because they keep being moved
Right.
the other way. What is your opinion about what I'm talking about? Do you, you know, what do you think about that whole fight for equality with women, or that whole push back on the powerful woman? What do you think?
I feel like the pushback with the powerful woman, in my experience, I've always considered myself like a very hard worker. Like, I've always had so many different types of jobs, they don't even relate to each other. And I've always, like, really tried my best to be like one of the best workers. And I would say, like, I don't even get pushback from men. Like, usually I get encouragement from men in like the situations I've been in. It's always the women who are telling me that, like, I'm aggressive or I'm this or that. And so with that sense, like, I feel like a lot of women have taken the opinions of other people and they've like, it's like embedded in them, I guess. And so they feel like they have to project that type of energy on top, like, into me. And I mean, there's like, that doesn't really, like, hold me back, like, or anything like that. But for me, it's like a weird thing because in a lot of ways, we bring different things to the table, like, that men can't bring. And we should be embracing that. But I don't know. I don't know why I've been working around people who are like very content. So I mean, I don't know.
Hmm. I've heard that also, that women attack other women or are catty and things like that. And I've seen some of that. I think, to me, there's been a lot of progress. I think that there's more sisterhood now that I see than I used to see. I see a lot more women's groups besides sororities. You always had sororities, but I mean more, you know, Texas Black business women,
Right.
or, you know, I joined this Facebook group, you know, Women for Kamala Harris, and there's just a bunch of different groups out there that seem to be about sisterhood. There seems to be a move for sisterhood, and to, I saw somebody wearing a shirt, "Fix your crown," you know what I'm saying? Sister, fix your crown, So just these different little sayings and different little movements to lift people up and to promote sisterhood, and just to strengthen one another, because I think life, if we let it, life sometimes can try to pound on us a little bit.
I mean, I definitely see that online. Like, I always say that, like, my biggest supporters are people I don't really know. So I get a lot of support from women online. And then, like, I join a lot of the Facebook groups, Instagram messages. It's just in person. I don't know why that doesn't really translate over, because you would think that everybody's kind of on social media and they're all kind of going with the flow of like how people are doing the whole women empowerment thing. But um I don't know, like, I don't know what to say. Like, maybe they haven't gone through that process yet where they don't see, like, you don't really have to compete with anybody. Like, there can always be a lane for yourself, and you can always be successful within that own lane. Like, but I don't think people see that way. Like, everybody has to grow through their own process. But I think it's a given. Like, when you're on social media, you're gonna gravitate to the people who are more like-minded, especially like with the algorithm changing and stuff like that. So like a lot more content for you is pushed to you. So that might be why I keep connecting with people and they're more supportive, like, online. There's no algorithm in real life.
There's no
So you
algorithm in
gravitate.
real life.
Yeah.
That's true. Real life is just real life. You just meet whoever you meet, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's social media is so interesting, and connecting with people, on social media is so interesting. And I've actually had a lot of helpful conversations on social media.
Mm.
So I'm definitely grateful for it. Um, so, what do you want to tell people about your journey as a writer, as a podcaster, as a person? Any lessons, any insight that you want to share? Like, who are you? What do you want them to know about you and what you do and where they can find you? Those kind of things.
Okay. So what I want for people to get is you shouldn't have to really wait for anything. Cause for me, I was always like waiting for something. Like I've been told since I was like in high school, oh, you should start a YouTube channel. Oh, you should do this. I can see you being like famous. I can see you doing this. And I'd be like, oh, okay, 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 whatever. And like even when like that type of stuff died down, I was like, well, I still really want to do like, things in the entertainment, like, spectrum. And I was just always waiting for something. I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe it was like my parents' approval because, like I said, they're immigrants. So a lot of foreign parents, older parents, they always like want you to get like a degree and like go be a doctor and go be a lawyer or whatever. So, um, I don't know, like I guess I was waiting for their approval kind of. And like even for that, like, you only live for yourself. So you can't even really wait for your family's approval, your friends' approval, whatever. Like you just need to go ahead and start whatever it is that you want to do and like really be consistent with it. And that's what I did with my podcast because like I said, I had my own like little live show personally, but I was never really putting any work behind it. So when I like made this, and I was starting it with a lot of people at first, and I really couldn't get like a correct footing with like so many different people because everybody came in and they had their own idea of what they wanted the podcast to be. And that's where that boundary really had to come from because I had to fight for my own creative like ideas and be like, no, this is my show. This is, really what I want to do with it. And there's been people who have came and went, and there have been like really loyal people who have stayed. And so with that, like I was always so worried about how it would look like. And even when people left, like they would always like taunt like, oh, but aren't you worried about like the in and out? But even that type of stuff doesn't matter because when you have like a good idea and you're putting the work behind it, like it's gonna pay off in the future. So I'm just gonna circle back. I know that was long winded, but like just don't wait. Go ahead and start. Like things don't have to be perfect. Go ahead and like express yourself, express like whatever ideas that you have. So yeah, and you can follow Served on Sundays on Instagram, and you can follow my personal Vividly Vic.
Vividly Vic. I
Yes,
like that.
thank you.
You're welcome. I like it's interesting how you came back. You started off, the first thing you said was boundaries help you protect your energy.
Mm-hmm.
And now you were talking about protecting your vision
Yeah.
for your podcast, and how sometimes when you have a lot of people, your vision can start to get diluted and you actually have to capture it, bring it back, and
Right.
bring it back into focus. And I think that boundaries are so key to whatever you want to do. Like you said, whether it's a podcast, whether it's opening your own shop, having your own business, whether it's just the family that you want to have, the relationship you want to have, the life you want to have. Because once you get other people involved,
Mm.
they do bring all of their agenda and all of
Right,
their
right, right.
ideas, and you have to no, this is my life. This is my podcast. This is how I'm going to let this be. I'm protecting,
Mm-hmm.
the vision that I have. I'm protecting, my goals and myself, and I like that. So we kind of came back to the beginning. So I kind of, like I said, created this acronym E.D.A.N for boundaries, kind of helped me to examine my needs, to examine my life, to examine my relationship. So that's the E, examine. And then decide what boundaries I need. And then to articulate them, be able to affirm them for myself first, and then affirm them to others, articulate them clearly to others, especially once I got it kind of crystallized in my own mind what I really need. Because sometimes we don't get what we want because we're not clear.
Right.
So for me, it's helped me to become clear, to be able to articulate clearly what I want. Because, I know I was dating this guy, and he's going to be laughing if he ever hears this podcast. He'd be like, I gave you what you wanted. You got mad. Yeah, I did.
Oh my God.
Because I told you what I wanted, but that wasn't really what I wanted. It wasn't really what I meant. And I learned from that situation, you got to really think things through. You laughing like you have a something like that you wanted to add to that. Did that bring up anything?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so articulate, I can admit when I have misarticulated myself, and I had to go back and say, scratch that thing I just said. I've thought it through a little better. And here's what I really meant to say. This is what I really need. So to keep from doing that in the future, I said, let me put a little more thought.
Yeah.
Before I actually articulate this boundary, let me really think it through and reflect. And then to normalize the use of those boundaries and really to get used to the new normal and deal with the pushback. Deal with the consequences, have consequences that you're ready to implement, if things aren't being respected. But I think boundaries are something that a lot of people struggle with. I've struggled with them, but having them is a healthy thing. And it really brings us peace, which this whole show is about. Zennurgy, the urge for more peace in your life. So I think that as we go through the ABCs of Zen, this is a big word, boundaries that a lot of people are struggling with, and I'm glad that we got to talk about it. And so I wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast, and I wanted to thank everybody out there in Facebook Live land and in Instagram Live land who tuned in. So this was Miss Victoria.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, served on Sundays, so you guys can check her out. Tell them again where they can find you.
You can go to @served on Sundays on Instagram or @vividlyvic on Instagram.
Awesome. And I am Zennashe, Zenase. If you're looking at the Facebook Live, I do have a bunch of different merch. I have shirts, different colors. I have masks. I have hoodies and tees and blankets and pillows. I even have mugs now. I have doggy hoodies. I have all kinds of different inspirational and motivational merchandise. I also have things that celebrate the arts. I am an artist. I love the arts. I think the arts give us life. And so I want to thank you guys for joining us. I hope that you were inspired, uplifted, learned something about boundaries, maybe saw yourself in our conversation, and may you walk in Zennurgy. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Give the gift of lift. Lift people up. Lift people up so when they look at your shirt, they look at your mug, they get an inspiring message. They're lifted.